A poor rancher rescued a pregnant Mustang from auction, thinking he'd just saved a broken animal no one wanted. But under the crack of a gavel and the sneers of the crowd, he risked his last silver dollar only to discover this mare carried a secret that would shake the frontier. Out on the lonely ranch, under storm clouds and lamplight, the birth came. And when the foals dropped into the straw, the world gasped because there weren't one, but two. Twin colts, a miracle or a curse. Whispers spread through the town, some calling it providence, others swearing the army would claim them, and a bitter dealer vowing to take them back by fire and blood. Prejudice deepened, gossip sharpened, and the ranchers stood side by side with a grieving widow, bound together by faith and survival. But miracles don't come without a price. And as the law, the dealer, and the whole valley closed in, will mercy be strong enough to protect what was born? Will the miracle that shocked the world be stolen forever? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty auction yard as Charles Boone shifted his weight from one worn boot to the other. His calloused fingers touched the single silver dollar in his pocket, the last of his money. Around him, other ranchers and traders muttered and spat, eyeing the day's offerings with calculated interest. But Charles couldn't take his eyes off the pregnant Mustang trembling in the rough-hewn pen. Her coat, once surely gleaming, was now dull and patched with scars. Despite her condition, she held her head high, dark eyes alert and wary. A fresh rope burn marked her neck where they'd dragged her in. Next up, this here's sorry excuse for horseflesh. The auctioneer's voice rang out, dripping with mockery. Wild as they come, scarred up something fierce. Heavy with foal, too, though Lord knows what kind of mongrel that'll be. Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Charles noticed Jake Miller, the horse dealer from over Pueblo way, sizing up the mare with cold eyes. Miller was known for breaking horses the hard way, with whip and spur, until their spirits shattered. Might make a cavalry mount once I beat the fight out of her, Miller drawled, loud enough for all to hear. More chuckles from the crowd. The sound made Charles's jaw tighten. He'd seen too many good horses ruined by men like Miller, their trust betrayed by human cruelty. Before he could think better of it, his hand shot up. $1. The words burst from him like a gunshot. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, then grinned nastily. Well now, looks like we got ourselves a dreamer. $1 bid for this wild one, who'll give me two. $2. Miller called out lazily, fixing Charles with a hard stare. Charles felt sweat trickle down his back, but he raised his hand again. $3. The crowd turned to watch now, entertainment written on their faces. The bidding continued, each raise making Charles's heart pound harder. He had nothing left to bid with after his dollar, but something in him couldn't bear to let that mare fall into Miller's hands. $5, Miller said, voice growing sharp with irritation. Charles swallowed hard. $6. His voice cracked slightly. A heavy silence fell over the yard. Miller's face darkened like an approaching storm. The auctioneer looked between them, then raised his gavel with obvious disappointment. $6 going once, going twice, sold to the fool. In the patched coat, relief flooded through Charles, followed quickly by terror at what he'd just done. As he approached the pen with his precious dollar, Miller stepped into his path. You just made yourself an enemy, Boone, he snarled, tobacco juice staining his beard. That mare was meant for my string. You'll regret this. He spat in the dust by Charles's boots and stalked away. Charles's hands shook slightly as he handed over his last coin. The auctioneer tossed him the mare's lead rope with a sneer. Hope you know what you're doing, mister. That one's likely to. break your neck. But when Charles approached the pen, the Mustang didn't rear or fight. She watched him with those intelligent eyes, nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. He spoke softly to her, keeping his movements slow and gentle as he opened the gate. "Easy now, girl. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." The mare followed him with surprising willingness, though she startled at sudden movements. As they made their way down the muddy street, Charles felt the weight of disapproving stares. Whispers followed them. "Poor fool, wasting good money. On that wild thing, he'll never gentle her." Charles kept his eyes forward, leading the mare steadily toward home. The sun was sinking toward the mountains as they finally turned onto the rutted track to his small homestead. His cabin sat lonely against the darkening sky, smoke curling from the chimney where he'd banked the morning's fire. Just then, something remarkable happened. The Mustang, who'd maintained a careful distance the whole walk home, stepped closer. Her soft muzzle brushed his palm, warm breath tickling his skin. The gentle touch sent an unexpected wave of emotion through him. It had been so long since any living thing had reached out to him in trust. Inside his cabin, Charles stirred a meager pot of beans over the recovered fire. The tin plate clattered slightly as he served himself his simple supper, the lamplight casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. He could hear the mare moving about in the small corral, where he'd settled her with fresh hay and water, bowing his head over his meal. Charles prayed quietly, "Lord, I hope I haven't been a fool today. That mare needed help, and I couldn't stand by. But now I'm flat broke, and Miller's got it in for me. Please don't let me have led myself astray here." The wind was picking up outside, rattling the shutters he'd hung last fall. Charles finished his beans and washed up, listening to the Mustang's soft movements. Even now, he didn't regret his choice. Something about her reminded him of himself, wounded but not broken, needing just one person to believe in her. Blowing out the lamp, Charles settled onto his narrow bed. The darkness pressed close, broken only by occasional flashes of heat lightning on the horizon. He'd set something in motion today, spending his last coin on that pregnant mare. What would come of it, he couldn't say. But his sleep began to claim him. He remembered the gentle touch of her muzzle against his palm, and somehow that small gesture of trust made everything else seem manageable. Morning sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtains of Charles's cabin, casting pale stripes across the worn floorboards. He pulled on his boots, their leather creased with years of honest work, and stepped out into the crisp Colorado air. The Mustang stood where he'd tied her near the corral, her scarred hide catching the early light. Charles reached for the worn feed sack he'd stored in the lean-to. "Here you go, girl," he murmured, pouring a careful measure of oats into the shallow trough. The mare's ears flicked forward at the sound of his voice, but she kept her distance, watching him with those knowing eyes. Movement across the fence caught his attention. Amanda, the young Apache widow who lived in the small cabin granted by the agency, stood at her doorway. Even from this distance, Charles could see the redness around her eyes, the weight of grief pulling at her shoulders. The whole settlement knew she'd buried her infant just days ago. Though few had offered comfort, the Mustang stamped nervously, picking up on his distraction. Before Charles could move to settle her, Amanda approached the fence with quiet steps. A soft melody drifted across the morning air, an Apache lullaby, its gentle notes carrying something ancient and soothing. The mare's head lifted, nostrils flaring as she caught Amanda's scent to Charles's amazement. The Mustang's tense muscles began to relax. Amanda continued humming, her small hand extending over the fence. The mare, who had shied from everyone else, stepped forward to investigate. She won't usually let folks near her," Charles said, wincing at how clumsy the words sounded in the peaceful moment. Amanda's fingers found the sweet spot behind the mare's ear. Earning a contented sigh from the horse, animals remember kindness. she said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent. Even when men forget it. Her dark eyes met his briefly before returning to the horse. Charles nodded, not knowing quite what to say. He watched as Amanda's gentle touches seemed to transform the nervous Mustang into a different creature entirely. The mare's head dropped lower, eyes half closing in contentment. "Much obliged for your help with her," he managed finally. "Reckon? She needs all the friends she can get." Amanda acknowledged this with a slight nod, gave the mare one final pat, and walked back to her cabin. Charles couldn't help but notice how her steps seemed a little lighter than before. The sun climbed higher as Charles hitched up his wagon for the ride into town. He needed seed for spring planting, and though his pockets were empty after yesterday's auction, he hoped Mr. Peterson at the general store would extend him credit as he had in years past. The streets were busy with morning traffic when Charles tied his team outside Peterson's store. The bell above the door jangled as he entered, and conversation died away. He felt the weight of stares from the other customers, noticed how they drew back slightly as he approached the counter. "Mr. Peterson," Charles said, touching the brim of his hat, "hoping to get some seed on account, if you're willing. You know I'm good for it, come harvest time." The storekeeper wouldn't meet his eyes, suddenly very interested in arranging items on the shelf behind him. "Sorry, Boone, can't help you this time. You've always times are tight." Peterson cut him off. "Besides, word is you spent your last dollar on that raid horse yesterday." Charles felt his face grow hot. Raid horse. She's just a Mustang. Mr. Peterson, a pregnant mare that needed help. A woman in a fine dress whispered something to her companion, both of them eyeing Charles with a mixture of pity and suspicion. He heard fragments of their conversation as he turned to leave. Cursed horse, Apache raids, fool to bring it here. The ride home seemed longer than usual, the afternoon sun beating down on Charles's shoulders as his wagon creaked along. The rutted road, his thoughts circled like worried birds. Without seed, how would he plant? Without a crop, how would he survive the year? Had he truly been a fool to spend his last coin on that mare? Dusk was settling over the land when he finally turned onto his homestead. The Mustang's white blaze caught the fading light, and he noticed a figure standing at the fence, Amanda, one hand extended toward the horse, who seemed eager for her touch. Charles climbed down from the wagon, his boots raising small puffs of dust. Amanda didn't turn, but he knew she was aware of his presence. "She is good medicine," Amanda said quietly, running her hand along the mare's neck. "When I touch her, my heart does not ache so badly." The simple honesty of her words touched something. In Charles's chest, he thought of his own losses, how the weight of them seemed lighter somehow when he cared for this damaged, dignified creature. "You're welcome to help with her," he offered. "Reckon she takes to you better than anyone." Amanda's hand stilled on the mare's neck. "Thank you," she said, and though her voice was soft, the words carried genuine gratitude. She gave the horse one final pat before walking back to her cabin. Her figure growing indistinct in the gathering darkness, Charles tended to his evening chores, feeding his stock and banking the cabin's fire for the night. Through the thin walls, he could smell the smoke from Amanda's chimney as she prepared her own supper. They ate separately, each in their own quiet space, but both heard the mare's gentle wicker floating on the night air, a sound somehow both lonely and hopeful. The Mustang's call echoed across the darkening land, carrying with it memories of wild places and the promise of healing yet to come. In their separate cabins, both Charles and Amanda paused in their evening routines, listening to that sound that seemed to bridge the space between their solitary lives. The next morning dawned, clear and cool, with dew sparkling on the spring grass. Charles led the pregnant mare into the worn corral, her hooves leaving dark prints in the damp earth. He'd barely secured the gate when he spotted Amanda approaching, a small bundle of herbs clutched in her hands. "Good morning," she said quietly, her dark shawl drawn close against the morning chill. "I brought something for her wounds." Charles nodded gratefully, noticing how the mare's ears pricked forward at Amanda's voice. "Much obliged. Those old saddle sores still trouble her some." Amanda unwrapped her bundle, revealing dried plants and what looked like rendered fat. Her skilled hands worked the mixture into a greenish paste while Charles began gentle strokes. With the curry comb, the mare stood quietly between them, accepting their care with unusual patience. Here, Amanda demonstrated, applying the poultice to a raw spot on the horse's flank. "This will draw out the heat and help her heal." The mare sighed deeply, as if already feeling relief. Charles watched Amanda's sure movements, the way she hummed softly while she worked. The morning light caught the silver threads in her black hair, and he noticed how her face seemed peaceful when focused on healing. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of jeering voices from the road. 3 boys from town, probably sons of the mercantile owner, lounged against the split-rail fence. Kay Boone, the tallest one, called out, "Found yourself a squaw to help with that raid horse. Bet she knows all about stealing horses." Another added with a cruel laugh. Charles felt his face flush with anger, his hand tightening on the curry comb. But before he could respond, Amanda's cool fingers touched his arm. "Let them be," she murmured. "Their words are like wind through empty branches." The boys continued their taunting, mixing slurs about Apache raiders with mockery of Charles's poverty. Amanda worked on her movements, steady and deliberate, though Charles noticed how her shoulders had tensed. He forced himself to focus on grooming the mare, but inside he seethed at the casual cruelty. Finally bored with their sport, the boys wandered off, their laughter fading down the dusty road. Charles turned to Amanda, struggling to find words of apology. "I'm sorry the mare needs fresh water," Amanda interrupted gently. "I will fetch some while you finish with the curry comb." Later that afternoon, Charles rode into town, hoping to find someone willing to trade work for seed corn. The streets were busy with spring trading. Wagons lined up outside the general store. As he passed the saloon, voices drifted through the swinging doors. "Telling you, Sheriff, that mare bore the Army brand before someone tried burning it out." The horse dealer's distinctive growl made Charles rein in, listening. "Any foal she drops rightfully belongs to the cavalry." Charles dismounted quietly, moving closer to hear Sheriff Duggan's response. "Well now, Jed, that's quite a claim." The sheriff's voice held its usual careful neutrality. "You got papers to prove it?" "Working on getting them from the fort," the dealer replied. "Just making sure you know where things stand, legal-like." "Bring me proper documentation and we'll look into it," Duggan said. Until then, Boone bought that horse fair and square at auction. Charles waited until the dealer's heavy boots stumped away from the saloon before continuing down the street. His mind churned with worry. Would the Army truly try to claim the foal? Could they prove the mare had been their property? The afternoon passed in a blur of unsuccessful attempts to secure seed or work. As Charles rode home, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, promising a spring storm. The air felt heavy with approaching rain. He found Amanda at her usual post by the corral, watching the mare with concerned eyes. When Charles dismounted, she spoke without turning. "The little one is restless today. The storm makes her uneasy." Charles joined her at the fence. "Amanda, in town I heard something troubling. The horse dealer claims this mare once carried cavalry. Scouts says they might have rights to her foal." Amanda was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the weathered wood. Finally, she said, "Come, share my supper. There are things you should know." Surprised by the invitation, Charles followed her to her cabin. The interior was spare but neat, with a small fire burning in the hearth. Amanda served a simple meal of beans and cornbread, then sat across from him at her small table. Many horses bore tribal marks before they carried soldiers, she began, her voice soft but clear. When the army needed mounts, they took them where they found them. Some were stolen, some were sold under threat. The scars you see on her, Amanda gestured toward the corral. They tell stories of grief, not glory. Thunder rolled across the valley as she spoke, making the cabin's windows rattle. Charles thought about the mare's various marks and brands, wondering what tales of loss they held. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for sharing this. For all your help. You show such strength in the face of—" "No." Amanda cut him off, shaking her head. "I am not strong. I am only one who survives." Her voice caught slightly, like the mare. "We carry our scars and continue on." A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, followed by a mighty crack of thunder. Both of them rose instinctively, moving to check on the mare. The rain had begun to fall as they hurried to the corral. The Mustang paced anxiously, her sides heaving. Charles noticed how swollen she appeared, her movements showing signs of discomfort. "She is closer than we thought," Amanda said, concern evident in her voice. "The storm may bring the foal." Another lightning bolt split the sky, and the mare tossed her head nervously. Charles watched her labored movements, remembering how the dealer had threatened to claim her baby. Looking at Amanda's worried face in the stormy twilight, he silently vowed to protect both the mare and her foal, no matter what schemes the dealer might devise. The storm descended in full fury as darkness crept across the land. Rain hammered against the cabin roof like 1,000 drumming fingers, while wind howled through every crack and crevice. Charles struck a match to light his lantern, the flame dancing as another thunderclap shook the walls. Through the window, he caught sight of Amanda rushing toward the barn, her own lantern bobbing like a desperate firefly in the darkness. "The mare," she called out over the storm's rage. "She's starting." Charles grabbed his oilskin coat and hurried out into the deluge. Cold rain stung his face as he splashed through puddles toward the barn. Inside, the pregnant Mustang had already laid down in the fresh straw, her sides heaving with effort. Amanda knelt beside her, murmuring soft words in Apache while stroking the mare's neck. "Help me spread more straw," Amanda directed, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "She needs to be comfortable." They worked quickly, Charles forking fresh, bedding while Amanda continued to comfort the laboring horse. The lantern light cast long shadows across the barn walls, making their movements seem like some strange dance. Outside, lightning split the sky with brilliant fury. I don't know much about falling," Charles admitted, wiping sweat from his brow despite the night's chill. Amanda nodded, understanding. "Stay by her head. Keep talking to her. Let her know she's safe. I will watch for the foal." Hours crept by like molasses in winter. The mare's breathing grew more labored, her sides rippling with powerful contractions. Charles found himself speaking softly, telling her about the spring grass waiting in the meadow, about the warm sun that would return after the storm. Amanda moved between checking the mare's progress and preparing clean cloths. There, Amanda's voice cut through another thunderclap. "I see the feet." Charles peered around the mare's straining body. 2 tiny hooves poked through, their white tips gleaming in the lantern light. The mare gave a mighty push, and suddenly things moved very fast. Amanda's hands were there, supporting and guiding as a wet, dark shape slid into the straw. "A colt," she announced, quickly clearing its nostrils and rubbing it with clean cloths. "Strong lungs. Listen." The foal let out a thin whinny, making Charles laugh with relief. But his joy froze as he noticed Amanda's expression change. "What is it?" "What's wrong?" "She's not finished," Amanda said, her eyes wide with disbelief. There's another one coming." Charles stared in shock as a second set of hooves appeared. The mare struggled, clearly exhausted, but her instincts drove her on. Amanda worked with swift efficiency, her hands sure despite the unprecedented situation. Minutes later, a second colt slipped into the world. Twins, Charles breathed, sinking to his knees in the straw. Sweet Lord above, twins. Amanda worked quickly to clean the second foal, her movements precise despite her obvious amazement. Both colts were dark like their mother, with matching white stars on their foreheads. They blinked in the lantern light, their spindly legs already twitching with the urge to stand. "It is a gift," Amanda whispered, watching as the mare turned to nuzzle her babies. "The Great Spirit sends double blessing." Thunder rattled the barn's rafters, but inside their little circle of lamplight, all was peaceful. The colts made their first wobbly attempts to rise, tumbling against each other like eager puppies. Their mother watched with exhausted patience, occasionally nickering soft encouragement. The storm raged on through the night, but Charles and Amanda stayed in the barn, watching over their charges. They took turns dozing against hay bales, speaking in hushed voices about the miracle they had witnessed. As the first gray light of dawn began seeping through the barn's cracks, both colts were nursing steadily, their legs finding new strength. "With each hour, we should get some real rest," Charles said, noticing Amanda's drooping eyes. "Come up to the cabin. I'll make coffee." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. They made one final check on the little family, then trudged through the rain-soaked yard to Charles's cabin. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a fresh, clean smell in the air. Inside, Charles stoked the banked fire while Amanda sank into his most comfortable chair. Soon, the familiar scent of coffee filled the small space. They sat in companionable silence, cradling their mugs, watching steam rise in the early morning light. Never seen twins survive in horses, Charles mused. Folks in town won't believe it. They will call it miracle or curse, Amanda agreed softly, depending on their hearts. Charles studied her across the rim of his cup, noting how the firelight softened her features. For a moment, the cabin seemed to glow with unexpected warmth, almost like he pushed the thought away, but not before recognizing the feeling. Family. It felt like family restored. Amanda must have sensed something in his expression, because she glanced away, her fingers tightening on her mug. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Charles cleared his throat. "I should check on them again." Rising, he moved to the window, looking toward the barn. Something caught his eye in the yard below, tracks in the mud, fresh ones leading from the road to the barn and back. Someone had stood there in the night, watching, his heart clenched, remembering the horse dealer's threats about the foal. Now there were two prizes to protect. Akti kept his voice steady as he turned back to Amanda. "Mare and colts are probably hungry. Shall we bring them some fresh hay?" Amanda nodded, setting down her empty cup. Together they walked back to the barn, where twin colts dozed in the straw beside their mother, unaware of the challenges their very existence might bring. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm's fury washed away by gentle sunshine. Word of the twin foals spread through the small community like wildfire. By mid-morning, steady stream of curious neighbors made their way down the rutted road to Charles's ranch, Sarah Miller. The town's midwife of 30 years stood at the corral fence, shaking her head in wonder. Her gray hair caught the morning light as she watched the two colts wobble around their mother. "Never seen the like," she declared, adjusting her worn shawl. "Not in all my years of birthing, human or beast. It ain't natural for horses." Amanda stood quietly nearby, her dark eyes following the foal's playful movements. "It is a blessing," she said firmly, her voice carrying quiet conviction. "The Great Spirit gives according to his wisdom." Some of the gathered neighbors nodded in agreement, murmuring about miracles. Others hung back, exchanging dark looks and whispered concerns about omens. The twins, oblivious to the attention, nursed contentedly from their mother. Charles leaned against the fence post, pride warming his chest as he watched the foals. They were small but strong, their legs already steadier than the night before. The mare kept a watchful eye on her babies, occasionally nickering soft encouragement when they strayed too far. The peaceful morning shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The horse dealer, Jedediah Marks, rode up with two other men, his face set in hard lines. He dismounted with a theatrical flourish, pulling papers from his vest pocket. "These here are cavalry registration papers," he announced loudly, waving the documents. "That mare was Army property, which makes them foals, government issue." Charles straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the bill of sale in his shirt. "Pocket, I bought her fair and square at auction," he said evenly. "Got the papers to prove it." "Auction house ain't authorized to sell military stock," Marks sneered. "These papers show she was assigned to the 7th Cavalry. Government property, plain and simple." The gathered neighbors shifted uncomfortably as tension filled the air. Amanda moved closer to the corral, positioning herself between the men and the horses. "Show me them papers," Charles said, holding out his hand. Marks jerked back. "I'll show them to the proper authorities. Sheriff Duggan can sort this out." As if summoned by his name, the sheriff's wagon appeared on the road. Tom Duggan pulled up. Beside the gathering, his weathered face betraying nothing as he surveyed the scene. "Heard we had some excitement out here," he said mildly. "Twins, is it?" "And they're rightfully Army property," Marks insisted. Thrusting his papers toward the sheriff, Duggan took the documents with deliberate slowness. "I'll review these claims proper-like," he said. "Till then, everything stays as is. Charles bought that mare legal at auction, far as I know." But Sheriff Marks began. "I said I'll review it." Duggan cut him off firmly. "Now, unless anybody's got pressing business here, might be time to let these animals rest." The crowd slowly dispersed, though Marks lingered long enough to shoot Charles a venomous look. "This ain't over. Boone," he muttered before mounting up and riding away. Throughout the day, more visitors came and went. Some brought small gifts, a bucket of oats, spare blankets for the foals. Others simply stared and whispered, their judgment heavy in the air as evening approached. Charles and Amanda sat together on his cabin's porch, watching the twins frolic in the corral. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the yard. "I reckon I bit off more than I can chew," Charles admitted quietly. "2 new lives to care for, half the town against us, and barely 2 bits to rub together." Amanda's hands stilled in her lap. "The Great Spirit would not send abundance to break us," she said softly. "Perhaps he sends it to teach us to share strength." Charles pondered her words, watching as the stronger colt helped steady its sibling. After a stumble, the sight brought an unexpected lump to his throat. The peaceful moment shattered as a group of young men rode past, their horses kicking up dust in the dying light. "Well, ain't this sweet?" One called out mockingly. "It's a fool and the widow, playing house." "Better watch them foals," another jeered. "Might disappear like everything else around here." Amanda stiffened beside Charles, her fingers gripping her skirt. Charles felt anger surge through him, but he forced his hand to remain steady on the porch rail. Violence would only prove their cruel words right. "Let them talk," he said quietly, though his jaw clenched. "We know the truth of things." The riders moved on, their laughter fading into the dusk. In the corral, the twin foals chased each other in spirited circles, their mother watching indulgently. Their innocent play seemed to wash away the bitter taste of mockery. Amanda's shoulder brushed against Charles's as they sat in companionable silence. The simple contact carried more comfort than words could express. Together, they watched the last rays of sunlight paint the world in gentle gold, while in the corral, new life danced on spindly legs, reminding them that hope could flourish even in hostile soil. "They'll need names," Charles mused, watching the foals settle beside their mother for the night. "Tomorrow," Amanda replied softly. "Tonight, let them just be miracles." The evening stars began to appear, twinkling like distant lanterns in the deepening blue sky. In the yard below, the twin foals nestled close to their mother, their matching white stars glowing faintly in the gathering darkness. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Charles hitched his wagon while Amanda checked on the mare and foals one last time. The twins were still too young to leave their mother for long, but supplies couldn't wait. They needed flour, coffee, and feed for the livestock. "They'll be fine." For a few hours, Amanda said softly, patting the mare's neck. The horse nickered in response. Nudging her hand for treats, Charles helped Amanda into the wagon, conscious of the proper distance between them on the wooden seat. The morning air carried the scent of sage and summer dust as they rolled toward town. Church bells rang in the distance, calling the faithful to worship. As they approached the white-painted church, Charles noticed how Amanda's shoulders tensed. Townsfolk milled about outside, their conversation dying as the wagon drew near. Children stopped their play to stare. Charles tied the horses, then offered Amanda his arm. More from stubborn pride than custom, they climbed the wooden steps together, boots echoing on the boards. Inside, the usual welcoming murmurs turned to shocked silence. Sunlight streamed through colored windows, painting rainbow patterns that no one seemed to notice. Charles led them to an empty pew near the back, aware of every eye in the building. Reverend Matthews stood at his pulpit, Bible open before him. His usual steady voice wavered as he began the morning hymn. The congregation sang, but their attention remained fixed on the unexpected pair in the back row. The sermon started strong. Of God's mercy and love for all his children. But as the Reverend's gaze kept drifting to Charles and Amanda, his words began to falter. He lost his place twice, stumbling over familiar passages about brotherhood and acceptance. After the final hymn, Charles and Amanda stayed in their pew, letting others file out first. Through the open doors, they could hear the rising voices outside. A group of prominent townspeople surrounded Reverend Matthews on the church steps. "It ain't right, them sitting together like that," Mrs. Peterson's sharp voice carried clearly. "You need to say something, Reverend. Think good book's clear about mixing with heathens," Mr. Taylor added. "Ain't natural them to living so close." Spending time together, Charles felt each word like a physical blow. Amanda's face remained carefully blank, but he saw her fingers twist in her skirt. The Reverend's response was too quiet to hear, but his uncomfortable shifting spoke volumes. "Perhaps we should go," Amanda whispered. "The store will be empty now." Charles nodded, grateful for her practical suggestion. They slipped out the side door, avoiding the crowd at the front. The general store stood quiet and cool, the shopkeeper's wife watching them with wary eyes as they gathered their supplies. The ride home felt longer, weighted by unspoken thoughts. Finally, as they crossed the creek near Charles's land, he broke the silence. "My wife Sarah died 3 winters ago," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Fever took her so quick, there wasn't time to fetch the doctor from town." He paused, swallowing hard. "That's why the cabin feels so empty sometimes. Like it's still waiting for her to come back." Amanda was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "My husband, James, was a scout for the army," she finally replied. "He believed he could help build peace between our peoples. But when he died in service, neither side wanted to claim him." Her voice held old pain. "The Apache called him traitor, The whites called him savage. I became invisible to both. Charles turned to look at her properly then, seeing the strength behind her quiet dignity. The afternoon sun caught the silver threads in her dark hair, reminding him that grief aged people beyond their years. Back at the ranch, they tended to the horses and checked on the mare and foals. The twins had grown stronger each day, their spindly legs more sure as they played in the evening light. Charles watched them chase each other, their joy untouched by the day's heavy judgment. As sunset approached, Charles found himself reluctant to return to his solitary supper. Before he could think better of it, he turned to Amanda. "Would you care to share a meal?" he asked. "I've got fresh bread from town, and there's rabbit stew left from yesterday." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a warm smile that reached her eyes. "I would like that," she said simply. Inside the cabin, Charles lit the lamp while Amanda set two places at his small table. The familiar space felt different somehow, warmer with another person moving through it. The lamplight cast soft shadows on the walls as they sat down together. The stew steamed in their bowls, filling the air with savory scents. They ate slowly, sharing comfortable silence broken by quiet observations about the foal's progress and plans for the garden. Nothing grand or profound, just the simple conversation of two people finding comfort in companionship. Through the window, they could see the twin foals playing in the twilight, their white blazes ghostly in the fading light. Their mother grazed nearby, unconcerned by the deepening darkness. Neither Charles nor Amanda noticed a lone figure on the ridge above the ranch. Jedediah Mark sat his horse in the gathering dusk, watching the warm lamplight spill from Charles's cabin windows. His face was hard in the shadows, cold calculation in his eyes as he observed the scene below. The evening drew on, peaceful despite the day's earlier tensions. Inside the cabin, Charles and Amanda continued their quiet meal to wounded souls. Finding unexpected comfort in shared understanding, Spring painted the valley in delicate greens and golds. The morning air, sweet with wildflower fragrance. Charles stood in the barn's cool shadows, brushing the mare's coat until it gleamed like polished copper. Amanda worked nearby, weaving bright ribbons into the twin foals' manes for their first appearance at the county fair. "Hold still now, little one," she murmured in Apache to the fidgeting colt. Her gentle hand smoothed the ribbon as the foal pressed against her shoulder, seeking treats. Its brother nickered softly from the next stall, impatient for his turn. Charles paused his brushing to watch them. In the weeks since their birth, the twins had grown strong and graceful, their legs no longer spindly, but sure and swift. They moved with their mother's wild beauty, yet showed none of her early fear of humans. Instead, they'd inherited her quiet intelligence, learning commands quickly and showing an uncanny ability to mirror each other's movements. "The wagon's ready," Charles said, settling the mare's blanket. "Reckon we should head out soon if we want to make it before the crowds." They loaded carefully, the mare and foals settling into the specially prepared bed of fresh straw. Charles helped Amanda up to the seat, then climbed up himself. The spring morning stretched bright before them as they set out for town. The fairgrounds buzzed with activity when they arrived. Flags snapped in the breeze, and the air smelled of coffee and frying dough. Children darted between wagon wheels, chasing hoops and each other. Charles guided their wagon toward the livestock area, where several corrals stood, ready for showing horses. Word of the twin foals had spread through the county over the past weeks. As Charles and Amanda began unloading, people gathered to watch. The crowd grew larger when the twins emerged, prancing down the ramp side by side, their ribboned manes catching the sunlight. "Never seen the like," whispered a woman in a flowered bonnet. "Oh, moving just the same, like they share one mind, one mind." Charles led the foals to the showing corral, Amanda following with their mother. The crowd pressed closer, filling the rails 3 deep. Among them, Charles spotted Jedediah Marks, the horse dealer, his face dark with barely concealed anger. The twins needed no urging to show their grace. They bounded across the corral, perfectly matched in stride and spirit. When one leaped, the other followed in the same instant, as if connected by invisible threads. Their movements flowed like water, natural and unforced. Even the most hardened ranchers fell silent, watching the display of untaught beauty. Children pressed against the rails, pointing and laughing in delight. For a precious moment, the usual barriers of race and status seemed to dissolve in shared wonder. Magnificent creatures, came a deep voice. And Charles turned to see Roland Parker, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. The man's weathered face showed genuine admiration as he watched the foals play. "You've done well with them." "Boone, much obliged, sir," Charles replied, noting how Amanda tensed slightly at Parker's approach. "But they came this way. We just gave them room to grow." Parker nodded thoughtfully, then lowered his voice. "I'll give you $2,000 for the pair. Cash money right here and now." He pulled out a thick wallet, enough to clear your debts and stock your ranch proper. "Oh, what do you say?" The offer hung in the air like summer lightning. Charles felt its weight, knew exactly what that money could mean for his struggling ranch. New cattle, repairs to the windmill, seed for the fallow fields. A chance to prove himself to the town. But then he looked at the foals, still dancing in the sunlight. At Amanda, who watched him with quiet faith. At the children's shining faces pressed against the rails. Something deeper than money stirred. In his chest. "I thank you kindly, Mr. Parker," Charles said firmly, "but they're not for sale. These colts were sent for something greater than profit." Parker raised an eyebrow, but nodded with respect. "Your choice, Boone. Offer stands if you change your mind." From the edge of the crowd, Jedediah Mark spat into the dust. "Fools throwing away good money," he muttered loudly to those nearby. "But what do you expect when he's got that Apache woman whispering in his ear?" Probably filled his head with heathen nonsense about spirit horses. The words carried, bringing a chill to the warm afternoon. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, the earlier unity cracking like thin ice. Amanda's face remained carefully composed. But Charles saw how her hands tightened on the rail. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly enough. Despite the lingering undercurrent of tension, the twins continued to draw admirers, and several other ranchers approached with offers. Charles declined them all with quiet certainty. As the sun began to set, they loaded up for the journey home. The fairgrounds had emptied somewhat, though children still darted about, chasing fireflies that had begun to rise from the grass. Their laughter followed the wagon as Charles and Amanda started down the road. "You're laughing?" Amanda said suddenly, surprising them both. Charles realized she was right. A chuckle had escaped him as he watched the fireflies dance around their wagon. "Reckon I am," he admitted. "First time in a while." He glanced at her and found her smiling too. Really smiling the way she did when working with the horses. "Been a good day, hasn't it?" "Yes," she said softly. "A very good day." They rode on. Through the gathering dusk, the twins drowsing in the wagon bed behind them. The mare stood steady, seeming to know the way home by heart now. Fireflies continued to weave around them, like stars come down to earth, while children's voices echoed from the distance. Charles guided the wagon into the barn's welcoming shadows. Together, they settled the horses for the night, making sure. The foals were snug in their stall. The twins pressed close to their mother, ribbon-decked manes glowing faintly in the lantern light. Neither Charles nor Amanda noticed the deeper shadows that gathered at the edge of the property, where patience waited with darker purpose. They were too absorbed in the peaceful moment, in the simple joy of caring for their charges, in the quiet understanding that had grown between them through the spring days. The barn door closed softly behind them. As they headed toward their separate cabins for the night, the memory of laughter still warm in their hearts, Charles jerked awake in his bed, something wrong pulling at his senses. The air felt thick, and an acrid smell burned his nose. Smoke. His eyes flew open as realization struck. Through the window, an orange glow painted the night sky. The barn. He stumbled into his boots, not bothering with a shirt, and burst through his cabin door. Horror froze him for a heartbeat. Flames already engulfed the barn's roof, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. The dry wood crackled and popped. A demon's music in the night. Amanda. He shouted, seeing her emerge from her cabin, shawl clutched around her shoulders. The horses. They raced to the well, Charles grabbing the bucket while Amanda worked the pump handle. Water sloshed over his arms as he ran toward the inferno. Steam hissed where it hit the flames, doing little against the growing blaze. "We have to get them out." Amanda's voice carried over the fire's roar. She darted toward the barn door, pressing her shawl over her nose and mouth. Charles followed her into the choking smoke. Heat pressed against them like a physical wall. Through watering eyes, he saw the mare rearing in panic. The twins huddled behind her. Amanda moved forward, speaking soft words in Apache that seemed to calm the frightened animals. "Easy now, girl," Charles murmured, reaching for the mare's lead rope. His fingers fumbled with the knot as burning debris rained down around them. Amanda grabbed one of the colts, urging it toward the door. A thunderous crack split the air. "The roof!" Charles shouted. "Get out." He finally freed the mare's rope and pulled her forward. She balked for just a moment before following, dragging the second colt with her. They burst into the cool night air, coughing and gasping. The mare pulled free, circling nervously with one colt beside her. Amanda held the other twin, soothing it with gentle touches. But something was wrong. Charles spun around, counting. The mare, one colt. Where was a terrified whinny pierced the night, coming from behind the barn. The other twin. Charles turned back toward the flames, but Amanda caught his arm. "Charles, no." The roof with a deafening crash, the barn's roof collapsed inward, sending a geyser of sparks toward the stars. The heat drove them back, forcing them to watch helplessly as the flames devoured everything. Through the long hours until dawn, they fought the fire with what water they could draw. Neighbors arrived, drawn by the glow in the sky. Some brought buckets and strong arms to help. Others stood back, whispering about curses and foolishness. Finally, the flames died to embers, leaving only blackened beams and ash where the barn had stood. The morning sun rose pale through the smoke that still drifted skyward. Charles stood in the ruins, soot streaking his face, despair weighing on his shoulders like lead. "All my fault," he whispered, hands clenching into fists. "I should have Amanda's." Hand touched his shoulder, steady and warm. "Faith must hold," she said softly, "even when the world burns. This was not your doing." "A natural, if you ask me," someone muttered from the gathered crowd. Twin colts, Apache widow, bound to bring trouble. Charles whirled, rage burning in his chest, but Amanda's grip tightened on his shoulder. Her eyes met his, deep with understanding and warning. "Vengeance will only prove them right," she murmured. "We must be stronger than hate." Sheriff Duggan arrived late morning, his face grim as he surveyed the destruction. He walked the perimeter of the barn, studying the ground with practiced eyes. Near the corral, he crouched to examine something in the dirt. "Tracks," Charles said, hope rising. "Someone was here last night before the fire." The sheriff straightened slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. "Might be," he allowed, "but could be anybody's. Lot of folks been coming around to see them colts. Can't prove arson without more than some boot prints." "You know who did this?" Charles growled. "Jedediah Marks has been threatening. Threats ain't proof." Boone?" The sheriff's voice hardened. "Don't go making accusations you can't back up. That's a good way to find more trouble." The day crawled past in a haze of smoke and bitterness. Neighbors helped clear some of the debris, though many drifted away as the sun climbed higher. The mare paced restlessly, calling for her missing foal. The surviving twin stood close to her side, trembling whenever its mother's cries rang out. Charles worked mechanically, moving charred beams and twisted metal. His mind kept returning to the missing colt. Had someone stolen it in the chaos, or had it perished in the flames? The uncertainty gnawed at him worse than any answer could dot. As evening approached, Amanda brought him water and bread, insisting he rest. They sat together on his porch steps, watching the horizon where thin smoke still rose against the darkening sky. The surviving colt whimpered, a sound so lost and lonely it made Charles's chest ache. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. Amanda was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the mare and remaining foal. "We begin again," she said finally. "We rebuild. We keep faith." The night settled around them, like a heavy blanket. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, their voices mixing with the mare's uneasy cries. Charles felt the weight of helplessness pressing down, threatening to crush his spirit. But Amanda's presence beside him was solid, real. Her strength flowed into him, quiet as a spring creek, but just as persistent. Together they watched the stars emerge, each light a small defiance against the darkness that had tried to consume their world. The mare called once more for her missing foal, the sound echoing across the valley unanswered. The days after the fire stretched like shadows at sunset, long and dark. Charles walked his fence line in the gray morning light, tools hanging heavy from his belt. His fingers moved mechanically over broken posts and sagging wire, but his eyes kept drifting to the blackened ruins, where his barn had stood. The spring air carried the lingering scent of ash, a constant reminder of all he had lost. Each breath tasted bitter like defeat. He worked until his hands blistered and bled, welcoming the physical pain that distracted from the deeper ache in his chest. Amanda moved through these hollow days like a quiet spirit, her presence steady as the hills themselves. Every morning she tended the mare and surviving colt with gentle hands and soft words. Charles watched her brush the mare's coat until it gleamed, speaking to the animal in Apache when it grew restless, calling for its missing foal. "She grieves still," Amanda said one morning, her voice low as Charles paused in his work. Like all mothers who lose a child, the words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Charles knew she spoke of more than just the mare. He had seen her. Sometimes, in the evenings, standing at her cabin door watching the sunset with tears, tracking silently down her cheeks, word spread through the valley like wildfire. Farmers gathered at the general store, their voices dropping to whispers when Charles passed. "Cursed land," they muttered. "Fool's bargain, taking in that Apache woman, bound to bring trouble." The banker, Mr. Henderson, cornered Charles outside. The feed store, his ledger clutched in pale hands. "Your note's coming due, Boone," he said, lips pinched tight. Times being what they are, might be best to sell before foreclosure. Plenty of good land further west. Charles felt the walls closing in tighter with each passing day. That evening, he sat at his rough-hewn table, papers scattered before him like fallen leaves, numbers blurred together, each column ending in red. The cost of feed, repairs, seeds for spring planting, it all mounted higher than the meager funds in his strongbox. Amanda knocked softly at his door, a bowl of stew in her hands. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of sage and rabbit. She had taken to bringing him supper, knowing he forgot to eat when worry gripped him. "Maybe they're right," Charles said, pushing the papers aside. Maybe it's time to admit defeat. Head west, start fresh where nobody knows my name or my failures. Amanda set the bowl down and settled into the chair across from him. The lamplight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, reminding Charles that grief had aged them both beyond their years. I cannot run, she said simply. My people's bones rest in this earth. Our stories are written on these hills. To flee would be to deny who I am. She touched the wooden table surface, tracing its grain with careful fingers. The old ones say, a tree grows stronger when the wind tries to break it. Its roots dig deeper, reaching for life even in the hardest ground. Charles stirred his stew, letting her words sink into his troubled heart. But what if the roots aren't strong enough? What if everything I've built here crumbles to dust? Then we rebuild, Amanda said firmly. As many times as we must. The Apache know about losing everything: homes, family, freedom itself. Yet we endure. We remain. Her eyes met his, steady and clear. This is your place now, Charles Boone. Will you surrender it to those who dealt in flames and darkness? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, a coyote's cry echoed off the hills, wild and mocking. Charles felt the weight of uncertainty, pressing down like a physical thing. Amanda rose and moved to the hearth, where embers glowed soft and red. She knelt beside it, her shawl drawn close around her shoulders. After a moment's hesitation, Charles joined her. I haven't prayed proper since Sarah died, he admitted roughly. Felt like God turned his back when fever took her. And now, with all this, he gestured helplessly at the window, where the barn's ruins stood black against the night sky. Then it is time to begin again, Amanda said softly. She took his calloused hand in hers, her touch gentle but sure. The Creator hears, even when we doubt. Mercy flows like spring rain, washing away winter's death. Together they knelt in the flickering light, their shadows stretching long across the plank floor. Charles felt tears burning behind his eyes as words he had long forgotten rose to his lips, prayers his mother had taught him, promises he had made at Sarah's bedside. I've been such a fool, he whispered, thinking I could make it alone. Treating faith like a business deal, if I just worked hard enough, lived right enough, everything would turn out fine. Amanda's hand tightened on his. Is not a trade, but a gift. Like the sunrise, like breath itself. We cannot earn it, only receive it with grateful hearts. A coyote howled again, closer now, its voice rising wild and free in the darkness. Charles stared into the dying embers, feeling torn between the urge to run and the deeper need to stand his ground. Amanda's presence anchored him, reminding him of strength that went beyond muscle and bone. The lamp sputtered, running low on oil. Charles watched the shadows dance across the walls, remembering how Sarah had loved this cabin, how she had made it home with curtains sewn from flour sacks and wildflowers in tin cans. He thought of the mare and colt in their makeshift shelter, of Amanda's quiet courage, of all the reasons to stay rooted in this hard but beloved soil. The night grew deeper around them, but they remained by the hearth, two souls finding solace in shared prayer and silent understanding. Though despair still pressed close, Charles felt something shift inside him. Not hope, exactly, but perhaps its first faint stirring, like a seed pushing through dark earth toward distant light. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when the first wagon rattled up Charles's rutted drive. He stepped out onto his porch, coffee mug in hand, and squinted at the unexpected visitors. Old Tom and Martha Wheeler, who'd farmed the next valley for 30 years, climbed down from their wagon. Tom's arms were full of tools, and Martha carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Thought you might need some help, neighbor, Tom called out, his weathered face creasing into a smile. Brought my good saw and some carpentry tools. Before Charles could respond, another wagon appeared on the road. His throat tightened as he recognized Running Deer's family from the reservation. Their wagon bed was stacked with fresh-cut timber. "We have wood," Running Deer said simply, nodding to Charles. "Good pine from the high country." Amanda emerged from her cabin, pausing at the sight of the gathering. Her eyes met Charles's, sharing his wonder at this unexpected turn of events. More wagons followed throughout the morning. The blacksmith's sons brought iron fixtures and nails. 3 ranch hands arrived with post-hole diggers and shovels. Even Miss Caroline, the schoolmarm, walked up the path carrying a basket of fresh bread and preserves. The children helped bake, she said softly, her usually stern face softening. They wanted to do something after everything. Charles stood among the gathering crowd, emotion thick in his throat. These same people had whispered behind his back just days ago. Now they worked side by side, Apache and settler alike, clearing debris and measuring for new foundations. Martha Wheeler organized the women into a cooking crew, setting up tables in the shade of the old oak tree. The smell of coffee and baking biscuits drifted across the yard. Running Deer's wife showed Amanda how to make traditional blue corn cakes, their quiet laughter mixing with the sounds of hammering and sawing. Tom Wheeler directed the barn raising. With the expertise of decades, needs to be strong enough to weather any storm, he said meaningfully. And Charles knew he wasn't just talking about wind and rain. By midday, a framework began to rise against the blue Colorado sky. Charles worked alongside his neighbors, sweat soaking his shirt, amazement still fresh in his heart. The surviving colt pranced in its temporary pen, watching the activity with bright eyes. As the sun began its westward slide, a hush fell over the workers. The preacher's buggy was coming up the road, dust rising behind its wheels. Conversation died away as he stepped down, his Bible clutched in one hand. The preacher stood for a moment, taking in the scene. Settlers and Apache working together, the half-built barn, the shared meal laid out on rough tables. His face showed the struggle within. "Might we speak privately, Mr. Boone?" he asked. Charles nodded, leading him to the porch steps. They sat side by side, watching the community at work. "I've been troubled in spirit," the preacher began, turning his Bible over in his hands. "When I saw those twin colts running at the fair, there was something there. Something I couldn't deny." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It was like seeing a miracle with my own eyes. Made me question many things I thought I knew for certain." Charles waited, sensing there was more. "I've come to offer my support," the preacher continued, "publicly, though I suspect it may cost me some of my congregation." His knuckles widened on the Bible's leather cover. "But a shepherd must lead with truth, not fear." "That's a heavy price," Charles said quietly. "We wouldn't ask it of you. You didn't ask. God did." The preacher managed a slight smile, through 2 impossible foals and the change they brought to this valley. As evening approached, the workers began packing up their tools. Martha Wheeler promised to return tomorrow with more food. Running Deer's family secured the last roof beam before heading home. The new barn stood tall, though incomplete, a testament to what unity could build. After the last wagon disappeared down the road, Amanda walked the property's edge, checking on the mare. The sunset painted the hills in shades of gold and purple. Something caught her eye near the barbed wire fence that marked the canyon trail. A tuft of horsehair snagged on a rusty barb. Her heart quickening, she examined it closely. The color matched the missing colt's mane perfectly. She gathered it carefully and hurried to find Charles. He was storing tools in the new barn when she found him. "Look," she said, holding out the horsehair. From the canyon trail, the colt wasn't lost in the fire. It was stolen. Charles took the evidence in his rough hands, hope and anger warring in his expression. "The dealer," he said grimly. He must have used the fire as cover to take him. Amanda watched understanding dawn in his eyes, followed by fierce determination. It was the first time since the fire that she'd seen his old spirit return. They moved inside as darkness fell. The lamp cast a warm glow as they spread out an old map of the canyon trails. Amanda sharpened a lantern wick with careful strokes, while Charles cleaned his rifle, though they both knew violence wasn't the answer. "We'll need witnesses," Amanda said, testing the wick's edge with her thumb. "The sheriff can't ignore proof and testimony." Charles nodded, running a cloth down the rifle's barrel. "We'll get the preacher to come. Maybe Tom Wheeler, too. Men whose word carries weight in town." The lamp flickered as a breeze swept through the cabin. Outside, the new barn stood solid against the starlit sky, its fresh-cut timber glowing silver in the moonlight. It was more than just a structure. It was a sign that hope could rise from ashes. That community could grow stronger than prejudice. Amanda touched the horsehair again. This precious proof that their lost colt still lived. Tomorrow they would follow the trail at dawn, but tonight they felt the first stirrings of justice's return. The lamp burned steady as they planned, its light a beacon in the darkness, much like the faith that had carried them through their darkest hours. The rising sun painted the cliffs in shades of amber as 5 riders gathered at the canyon's edge. Charles tightened the cinch on his saddle while Amanda checked their provisions one final time. Tom Wheeler and the preacher sat astride their horses, both men grim-faced but determined. Nathan to Elk, an Apache scout known for his tracking skills, studied the ground with practiced eyes. Rains washed most signs away, Nathan said quietly, kneeling to touch the earth. But horse carries weight different when stolen. Hooves dig deeper, stride shorter from fighting the lead rope. Charles nodded, grateful for the scout's experience. He'd known Nathan through Amanda. They were kin through her late husband. The man's tracking skills were legendary among both settlers and tribe. They mounted up, Nathan taking point as they descended into the canyon. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and juniper. Their horses picked their way carefully down the rocky trail, hooves clicking against stone. The sun climbed higher as they followed the meandering path. Nathan would dismount occasionally, studying barely visible marks in the dirt or broken twigs that told their story to his trained eye. Sometimes he would stand motionless, head cocked, listening to the canyon's whispers. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. They paused in a patch of shade, sharing water from their canteens. Charles noticed how the preacher's hands shook slightly as he drank. This was far from his usual Sunday duties. "Getting harder to see the signs," Tom Wheeler said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You sure we're still on the right trail?" Nathan pointed to a scrape on a boulder. "Horse fought here, young one, still learning lead rope. Marks fresh, maybe 3 days old." Charles felt anger coil in his gut, imagining the stolen colt being dragged through these canyons. His hand strayed to his rifle, and he caught Amanda, watching him with knowing eyes. "Violence calls violence," she said softly, so only he could hear. "Truth needs sunlight to grow strong." They rode on as afternoon shadows lengthened. The canyon walls rose higher, painted in bands of red and ochre. Their horses' hooves kicked up dust that hung in the still air. That evening, they made camp in a sheltered alcove. As they sat around the small fire, Charles finally spoke what had been burning in his chest all day. "When I find that dealer," he said, staring into the flames, "part of me wants to make him pay. Not just for the colt, for everything. The barn, the threats, the whispers in town." Amanda sat beside him, the firelight catching the determination in her dark eyes. "I understand the anger," she said. "But bullets hide truth in darkness. We must prove this in the light, where all can see justice done." The preacher cleared his throat. "Vengeance belongs to the Lord," he quoted softly. Though I admit, seeing that man's cruelty tests my own belief in turning the other cheek. They slept uneasily that night, the canyon winds moaning through the rocks like lost spirits. Charles lay awake, watching Amanda across the dying fire. Her face was peaceful in sleep, though her hands still clutched the blanket tight. The second day brought them deeper into the maze of canyons. The walls closed in, making the air feel thick and close. Nathan's tracking slowed as the signs grew, fainter, tested by wind and rain. During their midday rest, Amanda shared water with Charles, their fingers brushing briefly. "My people," she said, would track buffalo calves across the whole plain, following the smallest signs. The old ones taught that nothing is truly lost if you keep faith in the search. Her words steadied him, as they so often did. They reminded him of larger truths beyond his own anger. The third morning dawned clear and cool. They were breaking camp when Nathan froze, raising his hand for silence. A thin tendril of smoke rose above the canyon rim ahead. They approached cautiously, leaving their horses ground-tied in a grove of stunted pines. Crawling through the brush, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. Below them sprawled the horse dealer's camp. 2 tents stood near a dying fire, coffee pots still sending up wisps of smoke. And there, tied cruelly short to a scrub oak, stood the missing colt. Charles's heart clenched at the sight. The young horse was thinner, its coat dull from harsh treatment. As they watched, it tried to reach for a tuft of grass, only to be yanked back by the rope. Its cry of frustration echoed off the canyon walls. Charles felt the rifle growing slick in his sweating hands. How easy it would be to end this now, to make the dealer pay for his cruelty. His finger traced the trigger guard. Then Amanda's hand was there, gentle but firm, covering his own. "Not steal," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "Witnesses." He looked at those with him, the preacher with his moral authority, Tom Wheeler with his respected name, Nathan Tuelk with his tracking skills that proved their story. These were weapons stronger than any rifle. Charles drew a deep breath and nodded. Amanda squeezed his hand once before letting go. They retreated carefully to their horses, gathering in a tight circle to plan. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. But first light tomorrow would bring justice, not vengeance. To this red canyon, the preacher pulled out his pocket watch, checking the time with trembling fingers. "Dawn comes early in the canyon," he said. "We should rest while we can." They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might alert the dealer. As darkness fell, Charles watched Amanda wrap herself in her blanket, her face set with quiet determination. Tomorrow would test them all, but tonight, faith kept watch beneath. The stars. The stars. The eastern sky bloomed with streaks of rose and gold as Charles and his companions prepared for their final confrontation. Dawn light crept down the canyon walls, chasing away shadows as they mounted their horses. Charles checked his saddle cinch one last time, his movements deliberate and controlled. Amanda rode beside him, her dark hair gleaming in the early light. Behind them, the preacher adjusted his collar nervously, while Tom, Wheeler, and Nathan, too. Elk flanked their group like silent guardians. They had sent a rider to fetch the sheriff the previous evening. Knowing justice needed proper authority to stand, they rode openly into the dealer's camp. Just as the sun cleared the canyon rim, the morning air still held its chill, and wisps of campfire smoke hung low to the ground. The dealer sprawled by his fire, coffee cup freezing halfway to his mouth as he spotted them. His 2 hired hands scrambled to their feet, hands hovering near their gun belts. "Well now," the dealer drawled, setting down his cup with exaggerated care. "If it ain't the fool rancher and his Apache woman. Come to admire my new colt, have you?" Charles kept his voice steady, though his hands tightened on the reins. "That colt was stolen from my property, Jedediah. Same night my barn burned." Dealer's face hardened. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his pants. "That's a serious accusation, Boone. I've got papers right here saying this here Colt's Army property." He reached for his saddlebags, pulling out a folded document. "Those papers are as false as your claim," Amanda said clearly, her quiet voice carrying across the camp. The mare was sold free and clear at auction. Jedediah's lip curled. "And who's going to take the word of, 'We will'?" Tom Wheeler urged. His horse forward. "My wife and I watched that auction, saw Charles pay fair and square." Nathan Two Elk dismounted, kneeling to study the ground near where the colt stood tied. "Horse was dragged here," he announced, "fighting rope whole way. Same tracks lead back to burned barn." The dealer's face reddened. "You bring in savages too? That's enough." The preacher's voice cracked like a whip. "I've watched you spread poison through our town, Jedediah. Seen you try to turn neighbor against neighbor with your lies." Hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Sheriff Dugan rode into camp, his badge catching the morning light. Two deputies followed close behind, rifles ready but pointed skyward. The sheriff's face was grim as he surveyed the scene. "Got your message?" he said to Charles. "These folks all willing to testify to theft and arson?" "We are," Tom Wheeler answered firmly. His wife nodded beside him. The dealer's casual manner vanished. "This is persecution," he snarled. "I'm a respected businessman who was seen near Boone's property the night of the fire." The sheriff cut in. "Got witnesses to that too. Town's been too quiet about your dealings, Jedediah. That ends today." Something dangerous flashed in the dealer's eyes. His hand darted toward his holster. "Don't," Sheriff Duggan said softly. The warning in his voice could have frozen summer water. "You're already facing prison. Don't make me add murder charges." The dealer's hand trembled, hovering near his gun. Long seconds ticked by. Then his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "Cuff him," the sheriff ordered his deputies. "Him and his men. We'll sort out all charges back in town." More horses approached, townsfolk who had followed to witness the confrontation. They gathered on the ridge above, their murmurs carrying clearly in the morning air. Charles recognized faces that had once sneered at him in town. Now watching with dawning understanding as the deputies led the dealer away, Charles approached the tethered colt. The young horse trembled, eyes rolling white with fear. Charles spoke softly, keeping his movements slow and gentle as he untied the cruel knots. "Easy now," he murmured. "Easy, little one. You're going home." Amanda appeared beside him, humming a soft Apache melody that seemed to calm the frightened animal. Together, they led it to where the mare and other twin waited with the preacher. The reunion brought tears to more eyes than just Amanda's. The two colts pressed together, nickering softly, while their mother nosed them both anxiously. Their joy at being reunited was plain for all to see. Amanda whispered a prayer in Apache, tears gleaming on her cheeks. "Thank you," Charles said to those gathered around. "All of you, for standing with us, for choosing truth." The sheriff tipped his hat. Truth has a way of coming to light, given time. Reckon we all learned something here today. The ride home felt different than the tense journey out. The sun climbed higher into a crystal blue sky, warming away the morning chill. The valley opened. Before them, like welcoming arms, familiar landmarks beckoning them home. Charles rode beside Amanda, watching how she sat tall and proud in her saddle. The weight of recent weeks seemed to fall away with each mile, leaving him lighter. The colts trotted behind their mother, already playing as they traveled. The preacher drew his horse alongside them. "I'll be speaking about this come Sunday," he said, quietly, "about how truth and mercy prove stronger than hatred. If you'll both come to service." Amanda smiled gently. "We will come," she said, "all of us together." They crossed the valley as the morning lengthened toward noon. Ahead lay home, and the promise of justice served, and the hope of a community beginning to heal its divisions. Charles felt the burden lift from his shoulders at last, replaced by something that felt very much like grace. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Charles's ranch as neighbors gathered in the yard, drawn by word of the twins' reunion. Children pressed against the corral fence, watching in wonder as the colts pranced together, their matching steps a dance of joy. The mare stood nearby, head high and proud, as if knowing her family was whole again. Preacher Morrison stepped forward, his Bible clutched to his chest. The crowd hushed as he cleared his throat. "Friends," he called out, voice carrying across the yard, "what we witness here today is nothing short of providence. These twin colts, born in storm and separated by malice, now stand reunited through faith and perseverance." He gestured to where Charles and Amanda stood side by side near the corral gate. Their birth was a miracle, yes, but the greater miracle stands before us, two souls from different worlds, choosing mercy over vengeance, service over profit. Charles squared his shoulders, feeling Amanda's quiet strength beside him. Some townsfolk nodded appreciatively, while others shifted uncomfortably, gazes dropping to the dirt. Yet none voiced the prejudice that had once flowed so freely. "These colts," Charles announced, his voice clear and steady, "they won't be sold, won't be broken for war neither. They have a different calling." He paused, looking out over the gathered faces. "They'll serve this community, pulling wagons for folks too sick to travel, carrying supplies to widows who can't make the journey to town, bringing mail between here and the reservation." Amanda's smile bloomed like sunrise as she recognized his vision, the colts becoming living bridges between divided peoples. Elder Mary Whitcomb nodded approvingly from her place among the townsfolk, while Nathan Tuelk touched his chest in silent respect. The newly rebuilt barn glowed golden in the evening light, its fresh-cut timber fragrant with pine sap. Laughter echoed from within as neighbors shared a celebration supper, the tables groaning with contributed dishes. Outside, children chased the playful colts around the yard, their gleeful shouts mixing with the horses' happy nickering. On the porch, elders gathered in rocking chairs, sharing cups of strong coffee and quiet conversation. Charles stood in his doorway, watching Amanda move confidently through their kitchen now, as she stirred a pot of venison stew. The familiar scents of sage, cornbread, and coffee mingled with something less tangible, but just as real, the sweet air of peace. The mare's soft wicker drifted through the open window, contentment in every note. Charles felt his heart swell, knowing that from loss and hatred had sprung this abundance of grace. Golden sunlight painted the valley in warm hues as evening settled over the ranch. The newly rebuilt barn cast long shadows across the yard, where neighbors lingered after the day's celebrations. Charles and Amanda sat together on the porch, watching as lamplight from the cabin windows spilled yellow patches across the wooden boards at their feet. In the pasture, the twin colts grazed side by side, their matching steps a mirror dance. Every so often, one would toss its head or buck playfully, sending its brother into a prancing response. Their happy nickering echoed across the valley, a sound of pure joy that made children pause in their games to watch. The gathering had drawn folks from all corners of the community. Settler families who once crossed the street to avoid Amanda now shared benches with Apache elders, passing dishes of cornbread and stew between them. Children, both white and native, darted through the yard playing tag, their laughter rising, sweet and clear in the evening air. Preacher Morrison stood from his seat, raising his hands for attention. The crowd quieted as he bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed, his voice carrying clearly, "we thank you for this evening, for the miracle of unity you've brought to this valley. Thank you for showing us that mercy builds stronger bonds than fear ever could, ever could." Beside Charles, Amanda's hand found his, settling there with quiet certainty. The hesitation that had marked their early interactions was gone, replaced by the comfortable familiarity of family. Charles looked at their joined hands, then at the gathered community, his heart full. "Reckon I was wrong about being alone," he said softly. "When I spent that last silver dollar, I thought I was just saving one mare. Instead, God answered with more family than I could have dreamed." As dusk deepened to purple, fireflies began rising from the grass like scattered stars. Their gentle light danced through the yard where people still lingered, sharing stories and laughter. Children chased the glowing insects, their delighted squeals mixing with the peaceful sounds of evening. The humble ranch house glowed warm against the darkening frontier hills, its windows bright with lamplight and life. Where once had stood a poor rancher weighted by grief and a widow bearing others' scorn, now stood a family bound by love and trust. The ground that had known only judgment and division now flourished with community and acceptance. They had all been transformed, shocked by grace into something new and beautiful, like the twin colts who now served as bridges between peoples. Once divided, in this quiet moment, as night settled over the valley, peace reigned, a testament to love's power to heal and unite. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.